Every morning, before the sun fully rose and while most of the city was still asleep, the same quiet figure walked to the iron gates of the mansion. Her steps were slow, sometimes unsteady, but she never stopped. The guards noticed it. The other staff noticed it. Even the neighbors passing by noticed it. The maid was sick. Everyone could see it in the way she held her chest when she thought no one was looking, in the pale color of her face, and in the way she paused just a second too long before climbing the stairs. Yet, no matter how bad she looked, she came to work every single day. Her name was Rosa, and she had worked in that house for years. She wasn't loud or dramatic. She didn't complain. She cleaned the floors, folded the clothes, and prepared meals with the same care she always had. When someone asked if she was okay, she smiled and said she was fine. It was a small smile, the kind that tried to hide pain. The wealthy family she worked for was busy with their own lives, meetings, school schedules, and endless routines. They assumed Rosa needed the job too badly to take a break. After all, many maids worked through exhaustion. It was sad, but not unusual. But this was different. Rosa's illness was not just a cold or tiredness. Some days, her hands trembled so much that cups rattled on the tray. Some days, she disappeared into the storage room just to catch her breath. The younger staff whispered among themselves, wondering why she didn't go to a hospital, why she didn't rest. A few felt angry. A few felt guilty. But no one truly knew the reason she kept pushing herself past her limits. What no one saw was what happened after Rosa left the mansion each evening. They didn't see the long bus ride, or the way she clutched her bag like it held her entire world. They didn't see the small apartment she returned to, or the secret she carried in her heart every single day. Rosa wasn't working because she was strong. She was working because she was terrified of stopping. Hidden behind her silence was a reason so painful, so deeply human, that if anyone in that house had known the truth, they would have broken down in tears. It wasn't about money alone. It wasn't about pride. It was about love, sacrifice, and a promise Rosa had made that she refused to break, even if it cost her everything. And on one ordinary morning, when Rosa nearly collapsed while scrubbing the floor, the truth came dangerously close to being revealed. A single moment, a single question, threatened to uncover why the sick maid still came to work every day, and what would happen next would change everyone in that house forever. The moment Rosa's knees weakened against the polished marble floor, the sound of the bucket tipping over echoed to the quiet hallway. Water slowly spread across the floor as she grabbed the edge of a nearby table to stop herself from falling. Her breathing turned shallow, and for a second, the world around her seemed to spin. She quickly looked around, hoping no one had noticed, but footsteps were already approaching from the far end of the corridor. It was Daniel, the senior house manager, a man known for running the mansion with strict discipline and perfect timing. He stopped when he saw Rosa struggling to stand. His expression softened with concern, something the staff rarely saw on his usually serious face. He stepped forward and reached out to steady her arm. Rosa immediately forced a weak smile and tried to pull herself upright, insisting that she had simply slipped on the wet floor. Daniel wasn't convinced. He had watched Rosa work for years, and he knew this was not just a simple accident. "You should go home and rest," he said quietly, lowering his voice so the other staff members wouldn't overhear. Rosa shook her head almost instantly. She insisted she was fine, that there was still too much work to finish before the family returned from their afternoon events. Her voice was polite but firm, as if leaving early wasn't even an option. Daniel noticed the fear hidden behind her calm words, but he couldn't understand why someone would be so afraid of taking a break. As Rosa carefully picked up the bucket and continued cleaning, whispers started spreading among the staff again. Some believed she was hiding a serious medical condition. Others thought she might be dealing with financial struggles that forced her to keep working despite her declining health. The mansion staff had seen hard-working maids before, but Rosa's dedication felt different. It felt desperate. Later that afternoon, Rosa moved slowly to the children's playroom, organizing toys and folding blankets. She paused when she saw a small framed drawing sitting on the shelf. It was a simple picture drawn by the youngest child of the family months ago. The drawing showed Rosa standing beside the child, both of them smiling under a bright yellow sun. Rosa gently touched the frame, and her eyes filled with emotion before she quickly wiped them and returned to her work. What the family didn't realize was that Rosa had built a quiet bond with everyone in the house, especially the children. She remembered their favorite meals, their school schedules, and even the small details they forgot themselves. But behind her warm presence, she carried a heavy secret that grew more dangerous with each passing day. That evening, as the staff prepared dinner, Rosa stepped outside for a short break. She leaned against the back wall of the mansion and pulled out her phone. The screen displayed several unread messages and missed calls from the same contact saved only as home. Her hands trembled as she opened one of the messages. The words on the screen made her close her eyes tightly, as if she was trying to gather strength just to breathe. Inside the mansion, Daniel watched her quietly from the kitchen window. He noticed the way she wiped her tears before walking back inside, as if nothing had happened. For the first time, he began to suspect that Rosa's reason for working while sick was far deeper than anyone had imagined. And as the night continued, a sudden phone call reached Rosa during dinner preparations, a call that made her face lose all color, a call that hinted her hidden truth was about to surface, but not in the way anyone expected. Rosa stared at her phone for a few seconds after the call ended, her fingers still frozen around it. The kitchen noise continued around her, dishes clinking, staff members moving quickly, the sound of dinner preparations filling the air. But for Rosa, everything felt distant. Daniel noticed a sudden change in her posture. Her shoulders dropped slightly, and her eyes looked lost, as if she had just received news she was not ready to face. He stepped closer, asking softly if she needed help. But Rosa quickly placed her phone back into her pocket and shook her head, forcing another tired smile. She insisted she was fine and returned to arranging plates as if nothing had happened. Across the mansion, the family prepared for an important evening gathering. Guests were expected, and the entire house buzzed with activity. Rosa moved from room to room, completing her tasks with quiet urgency. However, her hands trembled more than usual, and several times she had to stop and steady herself against the walls. The younger maid, Lena, watched Rosa carefully. Lena had only joined the staff a few months ago, but she had grown worried about Rosa's health. She had once tried to ask Rosa directly why she never took sick leave, but Rosa had gently changed the subject, thanking Lena for her concern while making it clear she didn't want to talk about it. Later, while folding freshly washed laundry in the service hallway, Lena noticed something fall from Rosa's apron pocket. It was a small envelope, slightly worn at the corners. Lena picked it up and called Rosa's name, but Rosa quickly turned around and grabbed the envelope, her reaction sharper than anyone had ever seen from her. For a brief moment, fear flashed across Rosa's face before she apologized softly and tucked the envelope back into her pocket. Lena felt confused and uneasy, sensing that whatever Rosa was hiding carried a heavy emotional weight. At the same time, Daniel began reviewing staff attendance records in his office. He noticed that Rosa had not taken a single sick day in years. Even during times when other staff members remembered her coughing or looking extremely weak, she had still shown up for work. The pattern troubled him. He began wondering if the mansion's demanding schedule had forced Rosa into silence, or if something outside the house was driving her to continue working despite her illness. He debated whether he should inform the family, but Rosa's loyalty and private nature made him hesitate. As the evening gathering began, guests filled the grand living room with laughter and conversation. Rosa moved quietly between them, serving drinks and adjusting decorations. She remained nearly invisible, as she had trained herself to be, but inside she was fighting exhaustion and fear. Each step felt heavier than the last, yet she continued moving, determined not to draw attention to herself. Meanwhile, Rosa's phone vibrated again inside her pocket. She ignored it at first, focusing on balancing a tray of glasses, but when it vibrated a second time, she slowly stepped into an empty hallway and checked the screen. Another message from home appeared, this time longer than before. As she read it, her eyes filled with tears she could no longer hide. Her breathing became uneven, and she leaned against the wall, trying to stay calm. Unbeknownst to Rosa, Daniel had followed her down the hallway. Concerned about her condition, he stopped when he saw her quietly crying, something she had never allowed anyone at the mansion to witness. He was about to speak when Rosa whispered something under her breath, a sentence that revealed her growing fear that time was running out, and that the promise she had been protecting might soon be impossible to keep. Daniel froze in the hallway when he heard Rosa whisper those words. He couldn't catch every detail, but the fear in her voice was clear. He stepped forward gently, not wanting to startle her, but Rosa quickly wiped her tears and straightened herself as if she had built a wall around her emotions in seconds. She turned toward him with the same polite smile she always used, though her eyes were red and tired. Daniel asked if everything was all right, his voice calm but filled with concern. Rosa nodded quickly, saying she had only received a personal message and that she would return to work immediately. Before Daniel could ask anything else, she picked up a tray and walked back toward the crowded living room. The evening gathering continued, and the mansion remained filled with elegant music and cheerful conversations. Guests praised the service, unaware of the silent struggle happening behind the scenes. Rosa moved carefully through the room, but her focus kept drifting. Every few minutes, she touched her apron pocket where the small envelope rested. It felt like the weight of that envelope was pulling her down more than her illness. Across the room, Lena watched Rosa closely. She noticed how Rosa paused near the staircase, gripping the railing for support before continuing toward the dining hall. Lena felt her worry growing stronger. She quietly approached Daniel and told him about the envelope she had accidentally picked up earlier and Rosa's unusual reaction. Daniel's expression turned serious. He had already been concerned, but now he felt certain that Rosa was hiding something important, something that might explain why the sick maid still came to work every day despite her worsening condition. Meanwhile, in the dining hall, Rosa carefully placed dishes on the long table, while guests admired the beautifully prepared meal. The bright lights reflected off the polished silverware, making everything look perfect from the outside. But Rosa's hands trembled as she adjusted the final plate. The room suddenly felt warmer, and her vision blurred slightly. She took a slow breath, trying to steady herself. The last thing she wanted was to cause a scene in front of the guests or draw attention to her fragile health. Her phone vibrated again, stronger this time, almost as if it refused to be ignored. Rosa hesitated, glancing toward the staff entrance. She quietly excused herself and stepped into the service corridor. Her hands shook as she opened the new message. The words on the screen made her heart race. Her face lost all color, and her breathing became uneven. She pressed her back against the wall, struggling to stay standing as fear and urgency flooded her thoughts. At that same moment, Daniel and Lena entered the corridor from the opposite side, searching for Rosa after noticing her sudden disappearance from the dining hall. They slowed their steps when they saw her leaning against the wall, clutching her phone tightly. The envelope slipped slightly from her apron pocket and fell onto the floor between them, landing just inches from Daniel's feet. Rosa noticed it instantly. Panic flashed across her face as she reached forward to grab it, but her strength faltered. Daniel bent down and picked up the envelope before she could stop him. The hallway fell into heavy silence. Rosa looked at him with fear, exhaustion, and quiet desperation all at once, silently begging him not to open it. And as Daniel slowly turned the envelope in his hands, noticing a hospital logo printed on the corner and Rosa's name written beside an unfamiliar child's name, the sound of Rosa's phone ringing again echoed through the empty corridor, growing louder, more urgent, and impossible to ignore. The ringing phone felt unbearable in the narrow corridor, its sound echoing off the walls like a warning. Rosa stared at it as if answering might change everything she had been trying so hard to protect. Daniel held the envelope in his hand, his eyes moving from the hospital logo to Rosa's pale face. He didn't open it, but the weight of what it might contain was already heavy between them. Lena stood frozen, sensing that this moment was far bigger than simple concern for a sick maid. Rosa finally reached for her phone with trembling fingers and answered the call in a hushed voice. She turned slightly away, but every word she spoke carried raw fear. Her voice cracked as she listened, whispering apologies, promising she would come as soon as she could. When the call ended, her knees nearly gave out again. She leaned against the wall, closing her eyes as tears slipped down her cheeks. This time, she didn't bother to hide them. Daniel gently placed the envelope back into Rosa's hand, but before he could speak, footsteps approached from the end of the corridor. It was Mrs. Whitmore, the lady of the house, drawn by the sound of the ringing phone and the unusual stillness among the staff. She looked at Rosa's tear-stained face, then at Daniel and Lena standing there in silence. Something in the air told her this was not a small issue. Mrs. Whitmore asked what was going on. Rosa tried to respond, but her words wouldn't come. Her chest tightened, and she pressed a hand over her heart. Fighting for breath, Daniel quickly stepped in, suggesting Rosa sit down. The concern on Mrs. Whitmore's face shifted into shock as she realized how unwell Rosa truly looked. For years, Rosa had quietly served her family, never once asking for help. Seeing her like this felt unreal. Before anyone could decide what to do next, Lena noticed a name printed on the envelope again and spoke without thinking. She asked Rosa who the child was. The question hung in the air, sharp and unavoidable. Rosa's eyes widened, and she clutched the envelope tightly against her chest. She shook her head, whispering that it wasn't the right time, that she couldn't explain. Not yet. At that moment, Rosa's phone buzzed with a new message. Mrs. Whitmore caught a glimpse of the screen before Rosa could turn it away. The word emergency stood out clearly. The hallway felt smaller, heavier, as if the walls were closing in. Mrs. Whitmore's voice softened as she told Rosa to speak, to tell them what was happening. But instead of answering, Rosa looked toward the dining hall where the guests were still laughing, unaware that everything was about to change. Her eyes filled with fear and guilt. She whispered that if she left now, something important might be lost forever. If she stayed, something else might be taken from her. Daniel realized then that Rosa wasn't just choosing between work and rest. She was trapped between two impossible choices, both carrying painful consequences. The second plot twist unfolded in that silent corridor. The truth was not only about Rosa's illness, but about a hidden responsibility she had been carrying alone, one that was now demanding an answer. And as Mrs. Whitmore reached out to touch Rosa's shaking hand, the distant sound of sirens began to rise outside the mansion gates, growing louder with each passing second, signaling that whatever Rosa had been trying to lay was finally catching up to her. The sound of sirens grew louder outside the mansion gates, cutting through the music and laughter from the evening gathering. The guests inside remained unaware, but in the quiet service corridor, time seemed to stop. Rosa's breathing became heavier as she stared at the floor, her hands clutching the envelope so tightly that it crumpled at the edges. Mrs. Whitmore gently held Rosa's shoulders, her voice calm but filled with urgency, asking her to tell the truth because whatever she was facing, she didn't have to face it alone anymore. Rosa's strength finally gave way. Tears streamed down her face as she slowly handed the envelope to Mrs. Whitmore. Daniel and Lena stood silently as Mrs. Whitmore opened it. Inside were medical documents, payment notices, and a photograph of a young boy, no older than 8, smiling brightly while sitting in a hospital bed. The room fell into stunned silence as Rosa finally spoke the words she had buried for years. The boy was her son, Mateo. Rosa explained between broken breaths that Mateo had been fighting a serious illness for a long time. The treatments were expensive, and Rosa had taken every extra shift she could, refusing sick leave because missing work meant missing the payments that kept Mateo's care going. She had hidden her own declining health because she believed if she stopped working, her son would lose his chance to recover. Her reason was not just survival. It was a mother's promise. She had sworn to Mateo that she would never give up on him, no matter how sick or tired she became. Mrs. Whitmore's hands trembled as she read the documents, showing overdue hospital bills and urgent medical notices. Daniel lowered his head, realizing how close Rosa had come to collapsing while carrying this burden alone. Lena wiped her tears, unable to speak. Rosa then revealed the call she had just received. The hospital had requested her presence immediately because Mateo's condition had suddenly worsened. She had been trying to finish her duties before leaving because she feared losing her job if she abandoned her responsibilities during such an important event. At that moment, Mrs. Whitmore made a decision that changed everything. She firmly told Rosa that her job was safe, that nothing in that mansion was more important than her reaching her son. Daniel quickly arranged transportation while Lena gathered Rosa's belongings. The tension that had filled the corridor shifted into urgency and emotional relief. Rosa hesitated, overwhelmed by the support she had never expected, but Mrs. Whitmore gently pushed her forward, reminding her that loyalty and sacrifice should never mean suffering alone. As Rosa rushed toward the mansion gates with Daniel beside her, the ambulance lights reflected across the driveway. She stepped inside the vehicle, her hands shaking, her heart filled with fear and hope. The ambulance doors closed, and for the first time in years, Rosa allowed herself to rest against the seat, knowing she was no longer hiding the truth. But as the ambulance drove away, Daniel received a call from the hospital confirming Rosa's arrival. His expression suddenly shifted. He turned toward Mrs. Whitmore with surprising news. The hospital staff had revealed that Rosa had quietly signed documents months earlier to become part of a medical research support program. Not for herself, but to help develop treatments that might help Mateo and other children in the future. She had never told anyone, continuing to work while secretly attending checkups connected to the program. Mrs. Whitmore stood silently as the mansion lights glowed behind her, realizing Rosa's sacrifice was even deeper than they had imagined. And as the night settled over the estate, one question lingered in everyone's heart: whether Rosa had reached help in time, or if her years of silent strength had already cost her more than anyone could ever repay. The ambulance disappeared down the winding road, leaving the mansion in an unusual quiet. The evening's gathering had ended, the guests long gone, but the staff lingered in the hallways, still processing what had just happened. Rosa's absence left a hollow space, not only because of the work she usually managed with quiet perfection, but because the secret she had carried for years finally came to light. Daniel, Lena, and Mrs. Whitmore stood together, sharing a moment of silence that spoke louder than any words could. Mrs. Whitmore finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. She turned to Daniel and Lena, explaining that Rosa's loyalty and courage were unmatched. She reminded them that the mansion had always been more than just a home. It was a place where people's lives intertwined in ways they often overlooked. Rosa had spent years protecting her son's life, balancing work, her health, and her secret with a grace that left everyone speechless. The family realized that the quiet Maid they had sometimes taken for granted had been the heart of their household all along. The next morning, Rosa returned to the mansion, but this time she was not alone. Mateo, now stabilized after urgent treatment, was with her, wrapped in a blanket, his small hand holding hers. The sight brought tears to everyone's eyes. Rosa's colleagues had never seen her smile so fully, a mixture of relief and hope lighting up her tired features. Mrs. Whitmore knelt beside the boy, welcoming him with warmth and gratitude, while Daniel and Lena exchanged glances, both feeling the deep impact of Rosa's sacrifice. The mansion took on a different atmosphere after that day. Rosa no longer hid her illness or her struggles. She was encouraged to take breaks, attend medical appointments, and spend time with Mateo without guilt or fear. The staff, inspired by her dedication, worked together more closely, their respect for Rosa growing even stronger. Rosa's story spread quietly among the community, reminding everyone of the quiet heroes who often go unnoticed, sacrificing everything for those they love. In the weeks that followed, Rosa continued her work, but with a newfound sense of balance. Mateo began recovering steadily, and Rosa could finally breathe without the constant weight of secret fear pressing down on her shoulders. She no longer felt that her loyalty to the mansion required her own suffering. The family she had served for years expressed gratitude in small and large ways, meals left with care, notes of thanks, and simple acts of recognition that reminded Rosa she mattered beyond her work. Reflecting on the events, Daniel realized the importance of empathy and understanding, how the smallest signs of struggle could hide a much larger story. Lena, inspired by Rosa's courage, vowed to always pay attention to those quietly carrying burdens. Mrs. Whitmore, once focused only on appearances and schedules, now recognized the human heart behind every role in her home. And for Rosa, the greatest lesson was one she had always known but had finally allowed herself to embrace. Love and sacrifice were powerful, but they were most meaningful when shared, not endured alone. The mansion returned to its usual rhythm, but the memory of the sick maid who worked every day and the mother who never gave up on her child left an imprint that would never fade. In the quiet corners of that house, in the laughter of a recovering boy, and in the respect of those who had witnessed her courage, Rosa's story found its home. It was a story of dedication, love, and extraordinary strength hidden in the ordinary, reminding everyone that sometimes the smallest acts of loyalty hold the greatest power.